Okay, so welcome, Chela.
Thank you.
So I'll say a couple words about you, and you can say a couple words about you. Chela Davison is a leadership and creativity coach, and who helps people find their calling. And I discovered Chela on a call she did about a year and a half ago, and I've been on your email list and listening to your podcast since then. And my favorite thing about your work is talking about seasonality, that there's a time for doing, a time for doing less, a time for thinking, a time for harvesting. Um, and I think about that maybe not every day, but quite regularly. I'm thinking about what I'm doing. And Taylor lives outside of Vancouver.
That's right.
So is there anything else you'd like to say to introduce yourself before we get started?
Yeah, sure. I'll say a couple of words. I appreciate you pointing to the seasonality. I use a lot of various developmental lenses in my work, and I think the seasonality one is my favorite, and it's been probably one of the most useful for me in um, dealing with my own tendencies and creative energies, and far more deeply honoring my rhythms and my needs as I navigate and express my own calling.
Mhm.
And then the other pieces around, yeah, helping people find their calling. I think a couple of words about that is I'm really interested in the intersection between how, well, there's my dog. That might happen from time to time. Apologize. Um, is the intersection between our uh, waking up and growing up work, or what I would call our personal development work,
Mhm.
and our work in the world. And so that's where I really love to play, and I'm very interested and have a lot of experience in is how do we wake up to our nature? How do we wake up to our tendencies? How do we evolve those in effective ways so that we can really share our gifts with the world and do the work that we feel called to do? So
Well,
yeah.
um, so I should probably decide quickly which direction I'm going to go because I had a question about seasonality at the end. Um, yeah, I'll come back to it because
Okay.
it'll do well with some context.
Right. And
So
keep everybody hanging.
yeah,
Ooh,
yeah, so the
till
question
then,
about seasonality.
guys, gals, folks.
um, so this series. Oh, and that's my cat. She's not in, but she makes noise. The series is called "Finding Solid Ground in a Spiraling World." Being your strongest and clearest self at this critical moment in history. And so when you think about this moment in history, what are some things you're observing, either both about what's happening, but also about how people seem to be reacting to what's happening?
Mm. Well, I would say that so the what's happening, gosh, that can be so context dependent, which is so important. And I think how people react is also context dependent. If I kind of feel into just the wider field of the planet, because there's a lot happening in a lot of places, many of which I am not informed about at all. But it seems like, I really love the title actually of A Spiraling World, because it's very evocative for me of dynamism and potentially chaos that could be going down or could be going up, could be going out, could be going inward. And so it feels like that is a very potent energy that is happening. And it can simultaneously, depending on where it's at the time of filming this, it's early autumn, it is gorgeous here, like it should have been 2 months ago. And so we're having this, like, everybody's like, oh, are you enjoying the weather? But also the climate grief. So there's like all these kind of layers of feeling, in a particular space of, oh, things are really collapsing, unraveling, falling apart. Yeah, in a terrifying kind of way, whether that's democracy, uh, politically, economically, environmentally. And then simultaneously, in feeling into the spiral, it feels like there is waking up, moving from individualism to collectivism, of people wanting to, really be here for this moment, sometimes I joke, but it's not a joke, is like, oh, are we living in apocalyptic times? I mean, I know many generations past have had their very big things to reckon with. So I think that some of the big issues we're reckoning with are not unique to our generation. But yeah, so that's kind of what it seems like is happening. What I'm noticing is, I mean, I love that you use the word reactivity. I think there's a lot of ways that people are reacting. But the reactivity over responding or initiating feels like the dominant way.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So when there's a lot of muchness, that can really overwhelm our systems. And then there's ways of reacting. So, I mean, I could go more into how I see people reacting if you want, but I just think just reaction, like
Just reaction.
trauma responses, yeah, reactivity.
And what's the cost of being reactive?
Connection to ourselves, to each other, to a wider context, connection and capacity to take perspectives and hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. Even our beings. I mean, I love that my dog barked and your cat mewed, and you know, the animal, the earth, the all of kind of life, our ability to be in well relations gets eroded when we're reactive.
Reactive. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think I'm gonna bring in my seasonality question now.
Great. Let's
Yeah,
do it.
because so I I founded Conversations Against Fascism because I had a big concern when Trump was elected president in the United States that we were on a fast track to fascism. And because I spent 5 years, I guess 4 years, not taking any action.
Hmm.
And I didn't want other people to have to go through such a long period of winter. But what do you see as like, what happens if your internal seasonality and the external seasonality are not matching up? Does that make sense? Like, if there's external urgency, but you can't bring yourself to
Yeah.
act like something's urgent, or there's a need to think before you act and you're reacting. Like, it can go either way.
Yeah, I think it absolutely can. And I think it often does, so a lot of what, as I'm helping people kind of align their interiority or their sense of calling with how that's being expressed in the world, most of the time there's some form of dissonance. And so when something is being called for externally, I mean, even if we just kind of look at, individualistic capitalistic culture that essentially wants a perpetual summer or a perpetual spring to summer kind of energy with a lot of productivity and engagement. And so I think even just culturally, that's an ongoing ask. It's a value system that is enculturated, that is unconscious. And so if people are slowing down or simplifying or taking time or doing anything that doesn't kind of meet that call of urgency and I would even say desperation in that field, at the energetic field of go, 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 push, produce, get somewhere, acquire, we will immediately feel that dissonance as laziness. And so I'm speaking to it in this particular way, but if there's, say, political urgency or just your life is calling for something and you are not operating from that season, I think the first thing that will happen often is if we're not actually consciously working with seasonality as a lens to inquire into how am I, as my own separate sovereign individual being, going to be in relationship with the context that I'm in, and what season am I in, and what season is this context calling for? If I'm not making those conscious moves, which, let's be honest, most of us aren't day to day, and if we're in reaction, we're not going to. Some of the things that are probably going to happen is a reduction of something as being wrong. So the circumstances are wrong. I'm wrong. I work with mostly women, a lot of women, and I see that one is really big. Is if I'm unable to do the thing that it seems is called for, there's something wrong with me, I'm failing, and then add whatever other adjectives are self-diminishing. So I think that's the first thing that happens, and what's needed is self-compassion, compassion for others, because we see that too, especially in a lot of justice spaces, right? Is ideas about what right action is, about what right pace is, about what it means to act, what it means to speak up, and wanting to hold ourselves and each other to certain standards. And in this seasonality context, if we can get curious and compassionate about a longer view of time, and that external action is not the only thing that matters. In fact, being able to take right action requires incubation, requires alignment, requires being resourced, requires being integrated to be able to bring our gifts and our efforts forward. So, yeah, I think what it'll feel like is there's something wrong. And then there's something wrong with me. And working with that discord is being able to wake up to it compassionately. And sometimes when what's called for and where we're at, especially if like what we need is more rest and nurturing and nurturance, and what's called for is heat and moving outward, there will probably be some um, having to push, having to generate. We are doing it all the time in a survival context. So I think there's a both and, not like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go honor my winter, which is good. But sometimes that's not what's called for beyond the self.
Yeah, yeah. So I heard a lot of threads, and I also realized most people watching don't know what we're talking about. So can you give a really quick recap of the seasons?
Yeah, let me give a recap. And so I live out on the Pacific West Coast. Our seasons are very clear in Canada, but I'm also in a more moderate part of Canada, so we don't get like the super cold, but still get snow from time to time. So it's been really interesting working with this lens with, say, people who live where there's rainy season and, where it's different seasons. And so the idea here, and I've got a podcast episode on this if people are interested that they can go find, where I get more deeply into it, but really looking at seasons as life and death cycles, and then applying that metaphorically or literally to how we're moving through our own cycles and seasons in our lives and our projects or our initiatives. And so to go through them quickly, springtime is initiating, is a dynamic season, is a time where things pollinate and start to take root and start to bud. And there's a lot of activity and action, much of which will not continue to see life, a lot of which will die away. But it has this kind of coming out and moving forward, moving toward kind of energy. And then we move into summer, and days become longer. Days are becoming even longer in spring and then into summer. And summer has got where things that have been flowering are now fruiting. Seeds have now taken deeper root. So whether you think about a project or an idea or your own kind of interior curiosity will go from beginnings into established. So a summer season is where things are becoming more established, and that which wasn't or didn't take in spring kind of falls away. This can be a lot of workhorse energy, pushing through energy, getting things done energy. If you think about kind of agriculture, it's like a summer season, there's a lot of work there, but there's also a lot of energy and a lot of light. And then we start to move into autumn, which has harvest energy, reaping what you sowed energy, composting energy, falling away. So it goes from more of this established, static kind of into, again, dynamism, but in a death cycle. So falling away, shedding, things shed, things compost, they rot. Seeds go into the ground, not to grow anew right away, but to sit and incubate and go under. And frost isn't quite here yet. And so it's, both like, I get to harvest what I've made, and time to let things die away.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people who are in some form of a fall season will say things like, I just want to burn it all down, want to let it all go. Like there's death language that starts to arise in an autumn season, and there can be a lot of grief. Whereas in spring, you have more like possibility and hope and excitement and anticipation. And then a winter season is like void,
Mm.
quiet, dark, frozen over. Short days, very long nights. A great time for post reflection, a great time for incubation, a really good time to rest and fill up and regenerate. And people can often feel like nothing is happening, but this is where everything's under the surface, quiet, still, before life wants to come up again. And a lot of times in, again, the dominant culture of doing, producing, acquiring, getting somewhere, we don't honor the death cycles anywhere near as much as we honor the life cycles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I thought about when you were talking about dominant culture demanding spring and summer is if there's so much sense of false urgency
Mm.
that
Yeah.
we're constantly defending ourselves against,
Yeah.
that when true urgency comes up, we don't have any energy.
No energy. No energy, no, but I really love that insight. I mean, it's, yeah, false urgency, and there's scarcity in it. Scarcity of energy, scarcity of attention, the way that most of us are interacting with technology, to eroding focus and eroding capacity for deep work and to stay with things over time. And so, yeah, it's like then when real urgency comes, we don't have energy. We don't have capacity in our being. It's too complicated. It's too hard. It's, yeah. And so again, to the reactivity point, it's like, no wonder then there's reactivity, whether it's fighting against, shielding ourselves, freezing, ignoring. Yeah. It's like, we're not collectively set up to actually tackle the real issues that are longer
Or
time,
longer term.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you, as you know, this is not a simple question, but what do you see as some remedies like to this reactivity?
Well, no, certainly not simple. I don't know if you said simple, easy, neither of those things, although perhaps simple. I think a couple of things. One is, while I aim to advocate for and even kind of grow my own ways of relating and leadership around collectivism types of views, our own individual healing, growth, development, not from it's all up to us as individuals perspective. So I'm not saying what I don't want to do is say the remedy for that is for individuals to take the collective issues on our own shoulders,
Oh,
but our own capacity to, whether it's regulate ourselves or find ways to co-regulate with other beings, to have the capacities to operate from a place of sufficiency, to do our waking up, our awareness building, our growing up, our consciousness growing, our building muscles and skills. I think that those are a lot of remedies. So if you have a collective who's trying to tackle complex issues, and the individuals within that collective are sick, are under-resourced, are traumatized, how we work with each other is not going to be skillful. And then how we try to go about the issue is not going to be skillful. And so at the very close in core is, how do I get healthy? And this is another argument for a good wintering. Having wintering skill sets is, there are many people, especially activists, frontline workers, service-based people, women, who have an orientation towards care and will extract of themselves to to forward a movement or forward care, but aren't actually resourced. And so it is to deeply take care of oneself and do that in community and in partnership is one remedy, so that we are healthier and more effective individuals to come into collective action.
Yeah, that's interesting. That has me thinking about some of the things we work on, some of the workshops that I've done with Conversations Against Fascism. Like almost every workshop, we take a moment to do some mourning and getting present, which I guess I'm now hearing is autumn work.
Mm.
And then we also have like looking at burnout prevention and also looking at strategy, which is the spring work. So yeah, if you're ready to do summer, then you probably don't need us, but everything else
Right.
that's usually missing, that I saw is missing, right?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, and it feels like that's so needed, right? Is like even the ability to cognitively integrate a strategy and then to enact a strategy if you're, if you are not resourced. But again, I just feel like maybe that I already said this, but it feels really important to say is community care really matters. So what I think there's a lot of out there in developmental space, there's a lot of, you got to do your self-care, but a lot of people don't have access to support, to healthcare, to resources, to basic human rights and dignity to be able to generate that. Who come from, poor populations, traumatized populations. So that just feels important to say is I think in an individual, or just like underscore that in individualist culture, talking about self-care can feel like dumping it back on the individual. And well, what's wrong with you if you're not doing all of those things? And those are being able to resource and take care of yourself is something that is both learned, but also comes with having access and privilege. So that if that really matters in community care to co-build that type of resourcing feels like that's a big part of
the way to go.
the antidote. Yeah.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I'm hearing kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? Like we need some justice so that people can care for themselves so that they can work for justice.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think that's, part of how my delight with the seasonality is, can we do that in micro and macro ways? Because it's rather than it's chicken and egg, or it's like, well, what comes first? Well, can we do both? And can we do both in micro ways that help to kind of grow versus, well, I can't engage in justice work until I'm whole, complete, healed, whatever. Or, well, I can't engage with self-care or community care or these other practices until the job is done out here, which, in a spiral, it's not going to be done in our generation or probably many to come. So a long view of time, I think, would also be another antidote is these times, that how do we work with the urgency we feel without moving with urgency in our nervous systems?
Yep.
Does
That's
that
the question.
resonate?
That's the question.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the
A question to live. I
whole
mean, gosh.
question.
Yeah.
But it is a question of a lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. It's exploration. And I don't remember if we talked about this in advance. Do you have a free gift planned for our participants?
Oh yeah. So I have I've got this mini retreat. It's 4 days. And it's where we move through 4 different topics. Development, what it is that you feel you need to grow in yourself. Emergence, what is emerging and how to cultivate that emergence. Your leadership, what is it that you're feeling really called to lead? And then alignment, getting into alignment with that. And so there's one topic for each day. And we start with just like under 5 minutes, super fast morning practice to bring your awareness to it. And then you have a walking practice to take out and listen to. So you're getting away from the screen and are playing with the theme, and then an evening journaling practice. So 4 days of that. And yes, I am sending you with a coupon code so you can go and get that for free.
Oh, wonderful. I actually remember doing, I think I did the first 2 days of that, and I actually remember where I took a walk by the river in Pittsburgh. So
Awesome. Awesome.
wonderful. Any last words? I think we have about 2 minutes if we need it, or
Um, well, thank you for having me. I think the last thing that just feels really alive is like compassion, 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 not idiot compassion, if we can distinguish between enabling or making excuses for things that are unjust and unacceptable. But at this time of, compassion for ourselves when we're reactive, compassion for others when they're reactive, can we rest in compassion and a longer view of time on behalf of the deep work that we're here to do and contribute?
Mm,
Yeah.
very beautiful. Thank you, Chela.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. I think it's going to be very great.